So, today we're going to dig into a source text that makes a pretty bold claim that back in the 1970s, the United Nations didn't just turn a blind eye to political violence. It actually created a playbook that could turn that violence into international legitimacy. We're going to unpack exactly how the source makes this powerful argument, step by step.
And there it is. That's the core idea we're going to explore. The argument from our source material is basically this. In one single decade, the whole game of international diplomacy got flipped on its head, creating a new kind of playbook where violence could actually be used to get official recognition.
Okay, so to really get our heads around an argument like that, we've got to jump in a time machine. The source sets the scene in the early 1970s, which was a time of some serious global tension, and it takes us right to the headquarters of the United Nations.
The source starts its timeline by looking at who is in charge. On January 1st, 1972, Kurt Waldheim steps in as the new UN Secretary General. The text makes a specific point of highlighting his past as an officer in the Wehrmacht, Nazi Germany's armed forces, and presents this as some really important context for everything that was about to unfold.
Now, the case the source is building isn't about just one single event. It's about what it calls a clear pattern. It lays out a series of violent acts and then puts them right next to the official response or, the lack of a response from the UN.
So let's look at the timeline the source puts together. You've got September 72, the Munich Olympics massacre. The UN's response? Condolences, and the source really stresses this, no official condemnation. Fast forward a year, an airport attack in Athens. The UN's response? Total silence. Then in 74, a ship hijacking. Again, inaction. The text argues this wasn't just a coincidence. It was a deliberate pattern of looking the other way.
And this is where the whole story takes a really sharp turn. You might think this pattern of silence would lead to these groups being shunned, right? Well, according to this text, the exact opposite happened. It led to what it calls a diplomatic reward.
And that turning point, it's all wrapped up in one single document, UN Resolution 3210. And get this, it was passed on October 14, 1974. Just a few months after that last attack we saw in the timeline.
So what did this resolution actually do? Well, it was huge. It gave official UN recognition to the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and basically invited them onto the main stage of world diplomacy, the General Assembly.
And to show you just how big of a deal this was, the source points out this really jarring contrast. It says, hey, look at the PLO's own charter from 1968, which was still their official document at the time. And its stated goal, in black and white, was, and I'm quoting here, the destruction of Israel.
But it didn't even stop there. The recognition went even deeper. The PLO wasn't just recognized, they were given observer status and named the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. Think about what that means. In the eyes of the UN, no one else could speak for them. This wasn't just a nod of acknowledgement. The source argues this was a full-blown diplomatic prize.
So this win on paper had real-world, highly symbolic consequences, like right away. The PLO didn't just have a resolution anymore. They had a physical seat at the table, a platform right in the heart of the international system.
And just a month after that resolution passed, the PLO chairman, Yasser Arafat, is standing at the podium of the UN General Assembly. The source zooms in on this one powerful detail that was reported at the time. Arafat was allegedly wearing a holstered pistol as he gave his speech to all the world's diplomats.
And what happened next? The source presents as a direct result of the PLO's new influence. A year after Arafat's speech, on November 10, 1975, the UN General Assembly passes another resolution, 3379, and this one declared that Zionism, which is the movement for Jewish self-determination and statehood in their ancestral homeland, is a form of racism.
And if you look at the vote count, you can really see the political fault lines of that time. The resolution passed 72 to 35. The source says this was pushed through by a powerful coalition, the Soviet bloc, Arab states, and the non-aligned movement. And this wasn't some symbolic gesture that was forgotten a week later. It stayed official UN policy for 16 years.
Okay, so after all that, what's the big takeaway here? The source ties all these different threads together to make one final really big point about the legacy of that decade and how it shaped the world we live in now. And this is where we circle right back to that main argument from the beginning. The source's conclusion is that this whole sequence of events, from the pattern of silence on violence to the eventual diplomatic reward, set a really dangerous precedent. It basically showed the world that acts of terrorism wouldn't necessarily get you kicked out of the club. In fact, they could be your ticket in, a pathway to legitimacy and that coveted seat at the table. And the source doesn't just leave this as a history lesson. It ends with a pretty chilling statement about today. It argues that this playbook, the one written in the 1970s, didn't just vanish when the Cold War ended. It says, and this is a direct quote, "and this mechanism is still with us today."
So, in the end, the argument we've just walked through leaves us with a really tough and honestly timeless question. It's a question that you see playing out in conflicts all over the world today. What is the line between a freedom fighter and a terrorist? When does the world decide to condemn violence, and when does it decide to listen to the reasons behind it? According to the source, the line that was drawn back in the 70s is still incredibly blurry, and we're all still dealing with the consequences.